Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Zoe Geiger, and I am a senior sociology student in the honors program. Today, I'll be sharing some of the research that I completed while in this program, specifically delving into the process of school gentrification in the city of Decatur, Georgia. But before we can really dive into the issue of school gentrification, we first need to understand the context in which it occurred. In 2007, the Georgia Department of Education passed the Charter Systems Act, which allowed entire school systems to charter themselves off from surrounding school districts. City Schools of Decatur, also known as CSD, petitioned within the year to become one of these charter school systems, and by 2008, they were one of the first four in the state of Georgia. In exchange for greater accountability for student progress, schools were granted greater leeway in terms of programs and curriculums that they could implement that perhaps were outside of what the school mandated typically. The superintendent at the time, Phyllis Edwards, implemented several system-wide developments, including the International Baccalaureate program and curriculum, the enhancement of the Advanced Placement AP courses and dual enrollment with local colleges and higher ed institutions, as well as improved the teacher evaluation system, as well as the biannual progress reports to ensure that everything was continuing as it should. This led to a sharp increase in student achievement, which led to a positive reputation of CSD to be very widespread, even outside of the system itself. As a result, parents were drawn to the school system as they wanted to place their kids in this education system. As a result, there was a sharp increase in the size and a shift in the demographic makeup of the student body, which coincided with the changes occurring in the city of Decatur at the time as well. For this project, knowing that these changes occurred, I wanted to learn more about school gentrification and what it was. So to know what school gentrification is to know the history of it. The history of school gentrification is rooted in the shift to the neoliberalization of the education system, which pushed the narrative that parents are now more than ever responsible consumers of their children's education, which led to an increase in school choice. This brought about the conceptualization of buying into a revered public school system versus opting out of the public school system in favor of private or chartered institutions. Posey, Maddox et al. And Freitas also conceptualized school gentrification, characterizing it by four main changes. The first was an increased number of middle-class white families. The second was material and physical upgrades to the school. The third was the forms of exclusion and marginalization of low-income students of color, and finally was changes in school culture. This led me to my own personal question, which was looking into how the charter system, how the shift to a charter system in the city of Decatur impacted the developments of the town, and specifically how residents of Decatur viewed this relationship between one another. So for the purposes of this study, I used two main methods, the first being archival studies. The objective of these archival resources was to better understand how institutions in Decatur described or justified the shift to a charter system in 2007. So to do that, I looked at four different types of sources. The first was City Schools of Decatur school board meeting minutes, wherein I could trace the development of the charter system. The second was school and city plan outlines, wherein I could look at city initiatives and potential developments to improve the quality of both arenas. The third was news coverage of community developments to get sort of an alternative or reactionary perspective to these proposed changes. And finally was demographic information garnered from both the U.S. Census Bureau and the Georgia Department of Education regarding CSD students and town residents. This was used to contextualize the information garnered from my second form of data gathering, in-depth interviews. So for the purpose of this study, I completed 9 semi-structured in-depth interviews. And the point of this was to delve into the core of my research question, which is understanding residents' personal experiences and how they've come to perceive the relationship between the city and the town. I recruited through 3 main methods: public advertisements, personal networks, and snowball sampling. However, because of these recruitment methods, I also faced some challenges. I wasn't able to be as propositive as I originally intended. So this is where I faced the greatest amount of limitations pertaining to my data, and that has a lot to do with the demographics of the participants. As you can see here, all except one of the participants were white. The participants encompassed a 30-year range from 42 to 72, with 2/3 being under the age of 57. However, there were no representatives from those under 42. All but 2 participants had at least 1 child while living in Decatur, even if the child didn't currently live with them. And the 2 indicated that they did not and will not have children. And finally, the personal or household incomes were all at least least $80,000, culminating in an average annual income of $119,000. So all of these demographic factors, although they provide valuable experiences and perspectives, nonetheless could provide some skew in my interpretation of the relationship. That being said, from the data, there were three main themes that emerged. The first was school appeal. So to that end, all but two of the participants, those who moved here later or did not have kids in the school system, regarded the school system as a key component of the Decatur community and its culture. They noted that it was important for the formation of social networks, community culture, and town developments. To that end, Paul, a white 61-year-old with no children, said that, "I think not having kids in the school system was probably the biggest thing that determined our level of involvement in the community," speaking on how not having kids matriculate through the school system proved to be a barrier for him in developing social networks in the community. In terms of community culture, Honey, a white Jewish woman who was 58 with 3 children, talked about how the city changes, saying that when Decatur City Schools takes a week off, the city looks and acts differently. It is even much more so, referring to the school system, much more so than religious organizations, the center of community. And through these two quotes, you can see how the school system has impacted residents' experiences. Another point that they talked on was that the positive reputation preceded the school system, even for those without children. So for one of the participants who moved from Pennsylvania, she knew of the quality of the school system, even though she did not have children and did not plan on having children. Richard, a black 72-year-old with 2 children, said that the school system makes Decatur kind of the hot place people want to live, because most families who have young school-age kids want to put their kids in the best educational environment, and Decatur certainly represents that. Oftentimes you hear people looking to find a place in the city because of the fact that the public school system is one of the best in the state. And through this quote, he's talking about how the school system is used as a mechanism to draw more people in. This was also touched on by several other participants as well. Lastly, several participants noted that the school system was a point of pride for residents. It was something that they boasted about the community. Ron, a white 42-year-old with 2 children, speaks on this, saying, "I think it's a source of pride for the community to know that there are good schools and good school systems. There's a lot of pride in the involvement of the school communities as part of the overall Decatur community." This also goes back to the earlier point, talking about how integral the school system was into the overall structure of the community. This also ties in to the investment of the school system. So almost all of the participants noted that the tax rate was exorbitantly high in Decatur, and while they did not enjoy the tax rate, a lot of them saw it as a worthy investment when considering the quality of the school system. Jane, a white 46-year-old with no children, says, "From our understanding, the school system seems very good, like it's one of the best in the state, actually. We're more than happy to pay the taxes, even if we don't have kids in the school system." This ties in to the earlier point that I made about student achievement, as well as the subsequent shifts in the demographics. So from the left table, you can see how over the years, Decatur City Schools, marked by the institution, has consistently tested above the national and state average for both ACT and SAT scores. And on the right table, this is measured by race and ethnicity and demonstrates how the student body has grown, as well as how individual demographics has grown. Now, what's notable from this table is when you look specifically at the white students versus the black students. So the amount of white students grows on average about 10% each year, with an average of about 190 students joining the CSD system per year. This is comparable to the near stagnant rate of 0.5% for black students, and it's also worth noting that they're the only demographic that actually decreased in terms of their development over the years. This has led to an increased homogenization of the school system, which has been met with very negative reactions from students and parents alike. Jamie, a white 46-year-old with 1 child, comments on this, saying, "Decatur, for being where it is not diverse. Decatur is just expensive, but there is very little diversity in the school, which means there's a lot of rich white kids, and that's not necessarily where we're comfortable." Michael, a white 50-year-old with 2 children, also comments on this for the city as a whole, saying it's kind of boring to have every family that moves in to have Teslas or a couple of Mercedes in the driveway. And through both of these quotes, it's demonstrated that the school system has moved towards an increased homogenization in both the racial and economic factors. However, these changes did not just occur in the demographic sector, but also led to a sharp increase in the size of the student body over the years. This has brought about several very real concerns from parents about the capabilities of the school system. Some attribute the negative facets of CS Decatur, referring to limited communication between the school and the parents, or a perceived decline in personnel quality, to the size of the school system. Paul comments on this and comments on a situation wherein the superintendent was recently asked to step down because of embezzlement, saying, "I think about the latest school superintendent issue where he was asked to leave, and I think it's one thing to build something and another thing to maintain it." This idea of maintenance is a recurring theme throughout the participants when asked to speak on the quality of the school system and how it has changed. Michael also talks about this, saying, "The increase in school-age kids we experienced, it was unsustainable. There was no way that trajectory was going to maintain it." This has also continued on into other participants saying that they feel at this point the capacity of the students is perhaps just beyond the reach of City Schools of Decatur. Honey says that, "I think that City Schools of Decatur grew a lot too fast, and there's nothing they can do about it because this public school has to take children. But I think they could have focused more on quality, but they tended to focus on quantity." I don't know if you studied science, but there's some basic science here, very basic, literally the cellular level. You have a cell, and if it gets too big, it cannot communicate, and it either divides or dies. And there's a certain point in a cell, it's called surface to volume ratio, and if your surface is high, you cannot live, and that's exactly what we see in all the schools. City Schools of Decatur is a cell, so it's going to behave as a cell, and if it gets too big, it either divides or dies. This reflects the implications of the growing size of the student body and what this means for the future of City Schools of Decatur.